Hello, everybody, every one of you who is here. Uh, we are about to start talking about the art of caring leadership, and I have some guests that I want to invite on. So, first we have Andrea Clow, and she is one of the caring leadership coaches, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we have John LaFemina, and he is one of the leaders that's inside of the book, and the chapter involved them. And one of my favorite stories, so I'm excited to hear him kind of share that with you all. And then we have Cordelia Gaffar, and she's here as a caring leadership coach as well. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about the art of caring leadership. So you see the book behind me. Here it is right here. If you haven't already gotten it, please make sure you do go get a copy. And if you have received a copy, you've gotten one, and you love it, go to Amazon and write that review. It's important to have that. That's how we get more people finding the book, the more reviews we have on there. So make sure you do that. So I wanted to try to have these LinkedIn Lives consistently, including some of the leaders of the book and the caring leadership coaches, so that we can kind of bring things to life. And I found that in the launch. It was so fun because we had a couple people that were in there, and then it just really does, even for me as the person who wrote it, as I hear these stories being told again, it brings it all back to life and all the excitement around what it means to show care and express it in more consistent ways. So that's what I wanted to do today. And Cordelia, hi. I know that you kind of popped in, so good to see you.
Good to see you guys.
So when we're talking about the caring leadership coaches, when I wrote this book, I didn't just want it to be like a book by itself, just a book. I wanted to have an entire support system that was behind it, so that leaders who got to the end of the book and they felt like, okay, now what's next? Like, I want to do something else. What do we do? So I have a caring leadership self-assessment that people can take. After they take the assessment, they're invited into the caring leadership community. And in the community, there are all these other leaders on the same journey around the world, just trying to care more, trying to show more care, trying to show up that way. And then we have the coaches that I hand selected. There are 8 of them. And they are people who embody a lot of the different elements of caring leadership. And I thought they'd be great to help those who come out of the assessment wondering like what they should do next. And the coaches can help in that regard. And then we have a Caring Leadership Academy, which are just courses in which I'm the instructor. There are 9 of them based upon the behaviors that are in the book. And it's meant to be more tactical and give you more practical tips on how to actually express care and show up that way. So again, a whole entire support system. And that's why you see Cordelia and Andrea on here, because they are part of that support system. So I want you to get to know them a little bit more. So I'd like to dive in now into the chapter in the book on involve them, this idea of not trying to go at leadership all by yourself, not trying to, just make these decisions, say, I'm just moving forward, and not having anybody to help you or consulting or considering other people's opinion. And so, I don't know, John, I'd love for you to talk about that story that we have that's on page 67. And it's about that time where you were looking at that like very big new build that was millions and millions of dollars. Just walk us through what was happening at that time, if you could.
Sure. So we were actually doing well, right? The business that I was managing, and we were looking to expand. We were looking to add some new clients. We had, in fact, developed some new client relationships with some folks in the United Kingdom, as well as over in Korea, and we were very quickly projecting to run out of space in order to be able to execute all of the work, right? So it was a very exciting time. And so we got caught up in the excitement. I got caught up in the excitement, and we were planning a new facility, right? So we put together all the materials to convince senior leadership to invest $25 million to build a new facility on a fast track 9-month time frame, right? So this was very quick. It was going to cost a lot of money, $25 million. But I was confident that we were going to invest in this new facility. We were going to create this new capability and be able to bring in all of this new business, right, with these client relationships that we had been developing. At the time, right, this was at a time when the economy was just starting to downturn, and my team was advising me to go slow, to just, really sort of double check things. Let's be sure maybe we can be more efficient in our current facilities and slowly accommodate some new business. But I really had nothing. I didn't want to hear that, right? I wanted to grow. I wanted to go. Right. And so I just I kept putting off their concerns. And to be fair, my team treated me well. They really did. And I think it was because of all of the time that I had invested before that, right, in those relationships. As I said, I think as you portrayed in the book, I was making a lot of deposits into those relationships, and now I was making big withdrawals by not really paying attention to them, sort of dismissing their concerns and continuing to push forward. Well, I was successful in what I wanted to do. I pushed forward. I got to $25 million. We built the building in 8.5 months, right? And we opened it to no new business, right? And so now we had all of the costs associated with a brand new facility and none of the revenue to offset even the cost of keeping the building open. And it took about 2 years, right, of working really hard on a plan B and a plan C and a plan D in order to be able to make up all of that. And to be honest, we never would have done it if it wasn't for the support of my team, right? And if it wasn't, I think, for the fact that after we opened that building to no new business, they didn't say "I told you so," even though they had every right to. And it was really me needing to admit the fact that I had screwed this up, right? And that I should have listened to their advice, and that they then re-engaged and helped us put together those recovery plans. And we ultimately were able to recover, and we were able to build all the business that we had envisioned, right? And be successful. But it just took a little bit longer than it needed to. And it was a lot more painful than it needed to be because I didn't involve them and I didn't listen to them when I needed to.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I love the story of I think that's that journey of like when it's not so smooth, but then all of a sudden,
Right.
then you have a little bit of awakening or whatever, and things happen, or the team supports you, they rally. And I love the fact that you talked about this idea of building trust first. I've been saying this a lot in this idea of safe spaces. And people are like, oh, we want to create a safe space, a forum. We're all going to come and talk about these really tough issues. And it's like, well, number one, it won't be safe for those who are attending if you haven't done this trust building or the deposits that you talked about ahead of time, because they don't trust you. They don't know you. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know if there's going to be fear of retribution, any of those things. And so when you say that, it makes me think of how you did all that work up front. Then you saw the results in the back end, and you weren't perfect in the middle, which none of us are. Right. But the end result down the road, after I'm sure some interesting times on your part for a couple of years of trying to get there, that all of a sudden then it turned out a lot better for the better. And so yeah, I love that story. I don't know, Cordelia or Andrea, you have any comments on that?
Actually, John, I love that story, but I'm just curious about one thing before I make a comment. Like, how many years of deposits had you put into your relationship with your team?
3. I had been working with this team for about 3 years on building the business. So I came into that organization as a new leader from the outside of that organization because they were struggling, right? Because they were struggling with creating new client relationships. They were struggling with developing new business. They were struggling with developing new capabilities for the marketplace. And so I was able, when I first got there, I built that trust by actually engaging them, right? And listening to them and helping them figure out what we needed to do, and then helping them to create the circumstances that led to our ability to propose for a new $25 million facility. And so it was about 3 years of that success and engaging them that helped me get to that point. But then I just sort of lost my mind, right? And I was just like so excited with all this potential for building a new building and growing the business and just being crazy successful, that I just sort of forgot what I had done the last 3 years.
So like in that losing your mind piece, like what was really going on for you? I'm just, I'm wondering, you felt so confident in your relationship with your team that you were like, if we did this in 3 years, then man, just imagine what we can do, right? Or like what was happening?
No, that's exactly right. So I had confidence in my team. I interpreted at the time, right, their desire to go slow as being maybe a little bit of backsliding on their part, So I think that there was a little bit of, look at what we've done in the last 3 years. We can do this moving forward. I get that you're maybe reticent or concerned, but you know what? It was that kind of thinking that got you into trouble in the first place, right? Which is why I needed to come in and sort of help move the organization forward. And so it was a little bit of hubris, a lot of overconfidence on my part, and just an unwillingness to think that somehow we weren't going to be able to keep this really positive upward trajectory despite what was going on in the external world. Right. And of course, I had no control over any of that, and just refusing to admit that it existed didn't mean it wasn't going to affect us.
Yeah, I love that. But in the end, you decided to come back down to earth and be human. And I love you.
Well, yeah. I don't know if I decided to come back down to earth or I just kind of fell back down to earth. But either way, I got there. A little bit of Wile E. Coyote and all that.
Andrea, what's coming up for you?
Oh, so many things. I'm gonna follow with what you said of fell down, and what I've experienced in my corporate career, that when that trust is built, that you have expressed, it took you 3 years, that whenever a leader falls, there are the people, the team who catches him or her. And that is so obvious in your story too, and that's my experience too. All those deposits the previous years are almost building that support net, that leaders that can go and think big and have big aspirations and lead the team to places where they've never been before, and be able, and also believe that I also have that net to fall back to, and that is really my team.
Right.
Because when, to use your words, when leaders lose their mind, which I think it's great. I'm totally supportive of that. That's where you enter the creativity, the realm of unknown, and the possibilities, to still have those behind you who keep your mind. It's almost like you deposit your mind to them and say, hey, isn't this safe for me so that I can come back for it? So I love that in the story. And then for me, what's big, it says a lot about your leadership, John, that most people run when there's an issue, when the leader loses their mind. They look for other leaders who want to say they still are sane and have their mind. It's almost like people they flee the ship. So it says a lot about your leadership that your team stayed with you despite this bump in the road, because in those times you really find out who is with you and who's gonna go with you through the fire, through the difficulties. And based on my experience, that's really what molds a team and creates even more trust when we are together in those hard times and we get out of those together.
Yeah, I had a mentor early in my career that said, the essence of leadership is having to fix your own mistakes, right? And that was really true in this case, right? Because it wasn't only the damage that I had done with my team, right? It was also the damage I had done to my relationship with senior management, right? And that I had to repair those relationships as well. And so it really was a great learning opportunity, and the essence of having to fix my own mistakes.
I always say that it's like this leadership thing. It's not for everybody. It's not for the faint of heart, right? This is hard. It's hard to lead, and so there's people say, well, management and leaders, and the leadership game is hard, and it's hard if you want to care more and show more care and be more emotionally intelligent and want to leave a more positive legacy, and not one where people think of you as like, oh gosh, here he comes again. Right? It's like, and we know those people where you try to go around it. And I want to take 1 minute before we go on to just say hello to Abdullah and Ashley and Julie. Here's Julie had a comment here. So true, Andrea. That's when you find out who you've built trust and relationship with. Yep. When times are down, who's catching you? That's a big one. Who is catching you? So thank you for interacting with us, Julie, on this. And so, the reason why it's so funny after the fact, this is what happens when you write a book. You're like, dang it, I should have done this instead. I should have said this alternatively. And what I wish I would have talked about here, I said involve them, but really it's probably more of an include them thing. And so it's in your case, you weren't including their voices. So you weren't listening in there. And then at the same time, you weren't like taking all of what they have, like their skill set, and saying, how can we do this so that it doesn't go off the rails? Instead it was like, I'm like, just take off my, my Superman, like the bat cape. Like, it's like,
that's right. Stand up there. Where's my cape?
Yeah, exactly. And instead, like, including more people in that circle. I was just talking to someone this morning about it. It's like, people think of inclusion. When they think of inclusion, they think immediately like race, gender, like they think that. And when I'm talking about inclusion, I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking about just taking that, the invitation and sending it to everybody. Like, not right. What happens now in the corporate world is that we include this person and then maybe that person. And it's usually because of people like either we've worked with before, we like them, they're like us, whatever that is, right? And so in the end, though, it's saying, oh my gosh, I know like 10% of what's about to happen. Like, I know I have 10% of the knowledge base here. So I need to bring in like 90% more people. And I'm probably excluding people based upon my own like bias in the process, right? Because it's just bias of like, I've worked with this person, or this person lives in my neighborhood, or whatever that is. And I'm just forgetting there's this whole slate of people who, oh my gosh, they're quiet. So they may be the most quiet people, but they bring so much to the table. And in this case, right, I just keep thinking about, I should have probably said include all, because it is being more inclusive and making sure that we just corral all the greatness, all the goodness around the table when making a $25 million decision, right?
Right. Yeah. When we as we try to think about that at the leadership team at the laboratory, one of the catchphrases that we use to try to catch ourselves is the usual suspects, right? So when we're thinking about who do we want to put together to create a team to go after something, some new opportunity or some new task force or committee to look at an issue, the tendency is to go to the usual suspects, right? The people the people you trust, the people you've worked with before, but what you're then getting is the usual thinking. And so we need, we use that as a sort of a trigger phrase to say, okay, look, are we, is this just the usual suspects, or do we need to think beyond these folks and get some new people involved, right? Some people whose voices maybe we haven't heard before.
And I know that you all have been there and you kind of spearheading a lot of the DEI work that's happening there at the laboratory, and just trying to focus the organization on realizing where those biases are taking form. I don't know, I'm interested to know what you do now differently in this whole involve them, and how you can promote that inside the organization, given your role, to make sure that people are being more inclusive and just think, decision making and all of that.
Yeah. So it starts with just trying to be self-aware, right? And so that's, part of as a leadership team, what we're trying to do is to be more self-aware, so that we're questioning ourselves, right? Whenever we're thinking about who to include, who to involve. But the second thing is we have a new diversity and inclusion manager at the laboratory named Tanya Bowers, who's just fabulous and has really helped us sort of organize our efforts. We have now, I think, 8 or 9 employee resource groups that are able to help us, right? So when we think about as a leadership team, are we just engaging the usual suspects? And the answer is, well, yes, we are. So how do we go get some new voices? These employee resource groups then serve as a resource to the leadership team, right? For us to be able to get folks at all different stages of their career, representing all different aspects of diversity as part of our processes, right? And so it's really a great way for us to interact with the communities at the laboratory and be able to get more voices involved.
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate the efforts. I know that I remember where you started, so it's nice to see kind of where you're going. And then it is a journey, all of this, this idea of including more people, involving folks in our decision-making, not feeling like we have to be the one who's the smartest in the room that has to make all the decisions. We have to do it alone. It takes a lot of effort, being very intentional in the process, for sure. Andrea or Cordelia, anything that you wanted to add? Is anything that just sparks you on there, or anything else related to the Involve Them chapter, something that sparked you there?
For sure. For me, what comes up is follow up what you said, John. Early in my career, I had a manager who really involved me. When I just started at the Boeing company, I wasn't even aware that I am being involved. He just let me know of all these opportunities of this resource group and this other group and that other group. And if I'm interested, then he supported me. to go and be engaged and kind of put your name in the hat. And at some point, I was called on, and I got a small leadership role. Then I went and I sat with top leaders in our organization. So it wasn't, at the beginning, it wasn't really about doing much. It was just being there. And what I really learned along the way, and I appreciated in this leader, is that by putting me in these situations, I learned how to be involved before I was involved. So the mindset, I started to develop the mindset of how to think strategically, what kind of quality questions to ask, and how to see people in the room, and how to offer my perspective, and how to ask for other people's perspective. So one thing that I want to say to leaders who are listening right now, it's kind of a paradox. It's we want to include all the voices. At the same time, when people volunteer, put their hands up, and we don't know them, right, meaning we don't know their voices, we have this little bit of, oh, I'm afraid of what that person is going to do or say or be, because we don't know them. And this is where I want to invite all the leaders to just trust your gut. You're the leader, and there's a reason why you're in that leadership position. Invite them in, trust them at the beginning, allow them to show up, to be there, to get to know you. You put in the work to get to know them. And then that's when miracles happen. That's when people step up to that expectation, because if you have high expectation of someone, they're going to meet those. If you have lower expectation of them, they're going to meet those too. So as leaders, involve them, bring them up, have high expectations, and trust yourself.
Right. Yeah. When I first started at the laboratory, I was part of a new organization that was being developed to focus on some fundamental science areas that the National Laboratory was looking to expand into. And so we went through a big hiring phase. We hired about 30, 40 people over the course of 2 years, mostly all fundamental scientists. The laboratory at the time had a culture where they created committees to do everything, right? So all the committees had the same makeup, meaning that there was one person from every organization, right? Regardless of the topic, right? So sort of very ecumenical. And so nobody in our organization, because we were all relatively early career scientists, wanted to be on committees, except for me. And so I got to be on every committee, right, that was formed. And as you said, Andrea, right, the thing that allowed me to do was to build this incredible network across the institution, to interact with leaders of all stripe, right? Some good examples, some bad examples. But I could learn from all of them, right? But it gave me the opportunity, as you said, to just know how to be in those situations. And that was just really, really valuable. The lab culture today is very different with respect to how we deal with things, which is why I think we have to be so intentional about making sure that we're not picking the usual suspects for these committee assignments because they're just fewer, right? And so they're more valuable.
John, the thing I love about that is, first of all, when you made the statement that you have to start with self-awareness, right? Because that's where it all begins. Knowing your limitations and what you can allow, like the outer limits. And then also, I love the fact that you had this inclusive kind of culture already with the committees. What I experienced is, so I worked for a startup, an IT startup, when I was coming out of university. And one of my first assignments was to create policies surrounding quality insurance and inventory, right? And so I knew my limitations, right? I know like textbook what you're supposed to capture, but like I went in and I just talked to the people in the quality assurance department and the people that were dealing with the actual inventory and ask them, so how does this go? What would make your life easier? you know, how are things going missing, or, and, you know, in this discussion, I'm listening now and I'm like, so it's just like, there would have been no way for me to create a policy without getting the input of the people that are touching everything, you know, and the fact that sometimes companies will choose to just create policies and say, okay, now you do it this way, is unconscionable.
Right. Yeah, it's the Ramesses, right, effect. So let it be written, so let it be done, kind of thing, right? Yeah, that rarely works.
I didn't know we are going to church today now, John. Sorry, but you know.
That's all good.
It is true. I've been in roles before where often there was really only one time I was at the kind of the executive level. Most times I was at the director level. So kind of at that more of a mid to upper kind of level. And I always felt like things were happening to me. And I know people below, like all the folks that were kind of like not as senior as I was, were feeling even worse, like feeling like things were happening to them. They were victims of their circumstances, or like the leaders, just because there wasn't a lot of that whole like bi-directional, two-way support, communication back to them. The things I talk about when I talk about cultures of listening, that didn't exist. So because it didn't exist, the people, including me, often felt like things were happening to me. I mean, even to the extent that, when I was at a place where I was reporting directly to kind of the county manager, so it's like a CEO at one organization, and there were 2 reorgs, and I'm like, what happened? Like, this thing is happening, and no one asked. They just said, this is what's happening. And then they wanted me to go around and be like this culture ambassador. And I did try to be the bigger person. Like the first time it hit me and I was like, okay. The second time it hit me, I'm like, oh, ouch. And then they asked me to be this ambassador and go around to all these people who had been impacted by these different reorgs. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was stuck. I was so stuck. I was miserable. I felt victimized, which anybody knows me knows I hate this whole victim word. I hate it. But I felt that way. And part of it was I allowed this, like their decision to kind of, bring me down. And I also didn't use my own voice in a powerful way to say, wait a second, hold up. I'm not sure. Hey, sweetie. I say, I'm not sure I'm the right person to be doing this. Or let's talk about how this went down, because I didn't feel comfortable. I in that moment, I wasn't showing as my best, most confident self, using my own voice. And at the same time, they didn't ask me my opinion. Like they didn't go and seek out how I would like to see this go. And so, you go into, you're in these moments and you just realize like, wow. So I totally get what you're saying, this idea of just feeling like things are happening, and do you have a voice? Do you have a say? Is so important. It's still all about being inclusive. I mean, all it has to do is how many more people have you invited to the table? What are we doing to make sure that we're not making singular decisions based upon our own narrow lived experience? How about we go out and gather stories, figure out what other lived experiences are, either from the customer perspective, from the frontline perspective. We don't often do that, and then we make really poor decisions. So I'd like to say hi real fast to Emma from South Florida, and Lance and Brian. Hello there. And Aisha. Hopefully I'm saying that right. It might be Aisha. And I already said Julie. So thanks for joining and engaging. So don't forget to, you can ask questions and I'll put those on the screen for everybody, or you can pose scenarios and we can kind of talk through those as well. And that's always super helpful to kind of get the dialogue going. I know you're watching us, but we want you to be included in this conversation. I just talked about that, didn't I? I just talked about include more people.
Yeah,
so,
it's all about involvement, right?
Exactly. So come on now.
Community.
you got to play. If you're on Heathersfield, you got to play. All right. So just play with us here. So one of the things that's really, I remember when I'm thinking about with Scott. Scott is, he actually just got promoted, but he's an Army Logistics Officer at the Canadian Forces and Chief Leadership Officer at Moving Forward Leadership. So he has his own consulting firm, but he is in the Canadian Forces. And like I said, he was just promoted. I cannot remember his role. So sorry, Scott, if you're out there listening or will listen, if I'm not saying that right. But he talks about this idea of an after action review. And we've talked about this before, but when something happens. So like in this case, John, in this example, right, where you go through it and maybe you did this. I'd love to find out what you did after the fact, but something happens, something doesn't go right. And you have this review afterward, and you sit everybody around the table. And what he does is, I mean, I don't know if everybody, this is just part of the military, but they actually will like call the person, they'll say like, okay, well, Malcolm, we know that Malcolm did this thing. We all know that he did this thing that caused this ripple effect. Let's all talk about, why that happened, who was involved, what could we have done differently. So they go through this whole process of like how they could make sure they're focusing on mistakes. So that's safety right there, because they keep doing it over and over. So they're all used to the fact that they're going to bring the issues to the surface so that everybody can talk about it at the table. So I'm curious to know, John, how did, you kind of skipped over, you're like, it took 2 years. Okay. But like, what exactly, did you have an after action review after this was going downhill? What did that look like, that process?
Yeah, so we absolutely did that, and in fact, at least so I spent some time in the Army before I came to the laboratory, and at least in the U.S. Army, we do after action reviews after everything, regardless of whether it went well or it went poorly, right? And because it's all about trying to capture lessons learned. Right. And lessons learned don't always have to be, wounds and scars. Lessons learned can be what things went right so that we can reproduce those moving forward. So yeah, absolutely. When this whole thing sort of crashed and burned, we did an after action review of it to say, okay, so what went wrong? Where were my assumptions, right? Where were our assumptions about the business incorrect? Right? Where did we overestimate? Where did we underestimate? What do we need to do to fix that? Because it was that review of what went wrong and an analysis to try and understand what the root causes were of that, besides just, John was overconfident, that was important to understand in order for us to build the recovery plan moving forward. Right. And one of the things that we did identify at that time was, we weren't as aggressive with the relationship development with the clients that we could or should have been. Right. So one of the first things I did was get on a lot of airplanes and go visit those sponsors, those clients, and begin to build and strengthen those relationships so that when they were able to make decisions, given the changing economic circumstances, right, that they made those decisions in our favor, right, to give us the business. And so it was realizing that, okay, part of the building not having the business wasn't necessarily because we didn't do anything correctly or we did something incorrectly. It was in large part because of the economic circumstance. But given the fact that the economic circumstance was going to change at some point, right, we needed to make sure that we had the right relationships with those sponsors and clients so that when the economic circumstances did change, we were there and able to capture that business.
Yes. So, and I'm thinking about, what about your process before, before you went into that big project, was there almost, besides the after action, was there like lots of pre-planning happening with the whole group, or was it like, did you feel almost like single-handedly going about it, or were you?
Oh, no.
All your team, and you were constantly doing it all up to the point.
Yeah, we had all the folks involved, right? We had all the folks involved, but the critical things, is, right, for the investment were all the financial pro forma, right? And so we fell into, unfortunately, what a lot of organizations and a lot of people do, where we had these, hockey stick curves, where it's like, oh yeah, revenue is going to go up, but then it's going to really take off, and it's just going to go, it's just going to go nuts, and everybody's going to lose their minds, and it's going to be great. And so, we had these projections, and they were very optimistic, and they were everything that was needed, because look, at the end of the day, I knew what the ROI at the bottom had to be in order to get the $25 million investment. Right. And so, right. And so we did it. Right. And I think that, I think that the combination of the external economic environment, as well as the fact that we, I think, overestimated the strength of our relationships with those clients, right? So that in an economic downturn, that they would continue to invest in us. That those were bad assumptions.
I'm thinking of this. I'm thinking of Kevin Patterson on page 64 of the book. He says, he talks about, he says, no matter if it's the person at the front desk, the person on the phone, the person coming back to pick up the trash, somebody's going to be able to give you a perspective that you did not have. You got to be open and listen to that, because you never know what one little piece is missing that you needed to actually become clear on what the picture is. right? That just, oh man, I feel like that says everything, thinking about how sometimes we do undervalue different people inside our organizations. Again, if they don't have the title or they aren't like big mouths or like people who like to hear their voice a lot, right? Like really extrovert, very out there, then we kind of undervalue and underestimate what they can bring to the table. I mean, this idea of like, whether it's the plumber, whether it's the person who takes the trash out, I mean, they could be seeing something that we're not seeing. And we fail to even like think about them as a huge factor in our success. And then literally, I mean, I know there are organizations, I know I've read about them where like one huge innovation came from someone who was like cleaning the bathrooms or something, something that was just, you wouldn't obscure, you would not think it would impact like the whole operating of the business, but they were in a location that you wouldn't think, but because they could see things from the outside or they had exposure to certain things that we didn't, we were able to, get out of them, and they were able to come. And again, it was in a place where the environment was ripe for them to bring those, concerns or questions or insights forward. I just think that everybody, has value in this process, and, making sure that's really the message, is that we all have value in the process. Hopefully the organization creates that fertile ground to ensure that everybody can kind of feel comfortable speaking up, that we include them in the decisions that are being made that impact them, as Cordelia was just saying, like it's driving the business forward. They're in the front seats driving business forward. They are impacted. It touches them. So why not include them? If not, what happens is exactly what happened to me. You're like sitting around feeling like things are happening to you. And then when it's time to do buy-in time on big projects or anything, process changes, you're wondering why the energy level is not there. You're feeling like a change in culture and excitement around things. And it's because there were just a lot of people who felt like things were being done to them.
And then that's the piece, like everyone's talking about the diversity, equity, and inclusion, but, belonging is what matters. And that's why, bringing in everyone's perspective totally matters. Inclusion can be, there's Muhammad Hamoud, he says something like, diversity is a fact, but inclusion, I'm botching it, but basically like something's a choice and one thing is something where you're being more intentional, right? So you can include people, like they can be in the room or at the table, but if you don't ask them their perspective, they don't feel like they belong, And so I think that's the piece that's missing. And I don't think that we need a longer acronym. I just think we need more action.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I've heard people say that, like diversity is being asked to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance, but belonging is being asked to join the conga line.
Yeah.
Right?
I like that.
Yeah. I hadn't heard that last one being added before, so I do like that. And it is true, actually, the sense of like, I have my place in this organization, and I am valued for the unique gifts that I bring to the table and my unique voice and everything.
Well, and I can be me, right? I can really be I can be my authentic self, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And if they don't have those things, again, I think organizations are just missing out on a huge opportunity to just, again, innovate more, get more clients, all the things that we want. It's like all the things that you want. So if you can look at any metric, I can point you back to how if you give that to the people who drive the bus forward, you're going to get it. But if you don't give it to them, don't expect it. Now, I know there are organizations who you could actually argue that the opposite, because there are some where the leader was, if they had very little emotional intelligence, let's say. I can think of some examples. I'm not going to say those right now. And they have very little emotional intelligence, but they're like billion-dollar companies. So people would say, well, wait a second, they aren't caring leaders. How do they get to that point? The problem is I'd hate to see their turnover. I guarantee you they may be making a lot of money, but it's just people are not trying to stay there long. They have no affinity. It might be the money that might be keeping them just from pure need. But thinking that through, you want a high turnover rate and just like you're just producing. Yeah, you're producing. Yeah, you're a billion-dollar company. Or do you want folks to be like your biggest cheerleaders? Do you want to have a ton of people out there on Glassdoor and everything else just saying how horrible you are? But you're a billion-dollar company. So what are you prioritizing? Like, what are you valuing most? So yeah, I love this. I love that the conga line. I'm gonna have to add that to my thing here.
Well, let me offer something, because we're talking about actions, and I get asked from my engineering leaders, Andrea, what's one small step? How do I do this? Because this sounds so good in theory. And what I like to offer them when it talks to involve others, is really offer my experience that I had when I moved from finance to HR. Again, I have a finance degree, so moving to HR, I was already questioned by lots of my friends. Why are you doing that? So I moved over because of a leader. And I have moved with what John said. I had the knowledge of the after the fact review, and I had all these previously from my finance role, all these strategic thinking. So I was bringing that with me, and I was faced with a culture in HR that wasn't so inclusive. So what I have done is I have kind of made a pact with my manager who hired me to for the two of us to start small. So what I offered her is, I will be your how to say this, the trusted advisor. Involve me first. Let me involve you. So I will teach you how to involve someone, meaning me. Let's create that bond, that knowledge, that what I talked about, that being first. And then you will then do it with the larger team and then with your executive boss further on. So that is my invitation to leaders. Start small. Find one person that you can trust, that you can involve, and be open with that one person. Create this, what we created is this agreement of, if you're out of line, I will tell you. If I am out of line, you will let me know. And it was truly a partnership of, I could go in and tell her, okay, I'm going to use the name, Andrea, this is when you said that, I saw this effect on the team. So I was able to share with her the biases that I saw. I was able to share with her the blind spots that she didn't see. And we really created a really cool, trusted advisory bond that then she took, to the next level. And it worked so great that she then used it with her boss and then extended to the larger team. So start small. That would be my advice.
I like that a lot. I think I always call that an accountability partner. And absolutely, where you're able to find each other and call each other on the carpet in a respectful way behind closed doors. To say, I know you're working on your emotional intelligence and being more empathetic, and that was not a very empathetic conversation that just took place. So I love that. I love the fact that this is critical. Thank you so much for bringing that up. That's a really good kind of next step or action item for anybody who's wanting to make sure that they, they're showing up as their best selves. And Cordelia, did you have a parting comment on any of this as well?
I just want to echo what Andrea brought to the table. That is a great offer, and the other part of that is really, just inculcating that culture overall. You role model that, and then you encourage your team members to do the same thing, right? And that creates a culture of belonging. Little by little over time. A lot of times, people feel like that's giving up control, but having synergy is kind of like more of a stability control. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Thank you. John, what might be a last, for those who are struggling, maybe where you were some years ago, to include more people, to involve more people, what might be a pearl of wisdom or something you might want to leave them with too today?
Yeah, so I think if anything, it's just so critically important for leaders to be vulnerable, right? And to be able to admit when you screw up, right? We all understand that nobody's perfect, right? We all understand that we've all made our own fair share, and maybe some of us more than others, our fair share of mistakes, right? But being able to admit that and being vulnerable with your staff and with your peers is just so critical. Right, because that enables them to be vulnerable as well, and then you can begin to have really good, honest conversations, right? So I just think that's the most critical thing is never be afraid to admit when you've made a mistake, because until you do that, you can't move forward and fix it.
Thank you for that. I was just reflecting on this last part of this chapter. under The Art of Caring Leadership in Practice. So of course, The Art of Caring Leadership is the book. And the very end of it, it says, everyone wants to know that they are a contributor to meaningful work. We want to know that we have an impact on our environment. As a leader, find ways to include those you lead in meaningful ways that help fulfill this need. When you do, you will immediately feel a shift in their desire to go over and above to achieve team and organizational success. Which projects are you going to give away? With whom are you collaborating on work that must get completed? In what ways are you allowing others to make a contribution? And those are all things for us to consider today as caring leaders in development on this journey together. None of us being perfect, all of us having, right, something that it's something that we have to work on every day. Right. But I just want to invite everyone into the conversation we have. We'll continue that conversation also at the caringleadership.co website, which I believe Ashley's already put inside of the comments, but it's also here scrolling at the bottom of the screen. So you can go join the community for free. You can take the assessment for free if you'd like, and then just join in on this conversation. If you obviously didn't already have the book, go get the book and then just join in. These are guidebooks. This is a guidebook, and these conversations are guides for you to give you some good tactical moves. And of course, with Andrea and Cordelia being coaches in the community, again, you have some of that leadership that's there, that presence that's there to help as well. So I want to thank all of you for joining as guests, and it was awesome. And the good thing is that it's recorded. So once this goes off, it'll be recorded on the YouTube channel, on LinkedIn, Facebook, so you can all share it far and wide, and people watch this far after the show. So thank you all.
Super. Thank you, Heather. Thanks,
you all
Andrea.
be well.
Thanks, Cordelia.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.